Напомню еще раз.
Is things that we've done yesterday, and I want to remind you of the techniques of our today's webinar. Yesterday we had two sessions, and the first special session was devoted to the referendum and overall strategy of democratic forces related to the referendum. And I am grateful to all the colleagues and representatives of the democratic political initiatives, citizens initiatives, for their participation at the session. It was very interesting indeed, and I think that all the participants and several of the participants also have sent email to my colleagues and to me. It was really great to see each other. At the first working session yesterday, we were speaking about the constitutional aspects of regulation of elections and more. There was a very interesting track related to the topic of shaping of the election bodies and what can be the approaches. And I think related to the commissions, we will speak about this also today. Just in 1 minute, we will be ready to start our discussion, inviting representatives of different aspects and tracks. And before we start, I want to remind you
English into Belarusian and Russian. So please use the translation interpretation button below the screen, and you will be able to switch between the languages. If you want to request the floor, please signal that, even if you're the attendee, we will be able to grant you the floor. Если вы хотите взять слово, пожалуйста, подайте сигнал, мы можем и участвовать.
Just signal us, and we will let the floor to the attendees, also in video, in audio format, whatever. And at the same time, you will be able to write down your question in Q&A, and we will address it during the discussion. Therefore, I think that we may start. And I think right now, today, our today's work will be devoted to discussion of, namely, the concept of the new election code. And we want to touch upon in every of two sessions. We want to just speak in detail about the topics that will be touched upon by the code. And again, I want to remind you that really we are starting the process of the development of the code right now, right here with this discussion. And we want this discussion to be the first ignition for us to develop the code project draft with participation of civil initiatives and with the society as general. And therefore, I am grateful to the colleagues who joined us today from the side of civil society, Belarusian, and more from the organizations that are into youth policy, policies related to the women rights and to the rights of handicapped persons. We will be happy to listen to you also. And I think today we have two sessions, 1 hour 45 minutes each, and I think we may start right now. And I think we will just briefly represent one of the topics, each of the topics that is in the code or related to the code. And then later on, we will discuss among these experts who joined us the topics, and then later on we will speak about the matters, about the questions. And for example, I have some questions that are very interesting. I don't have so many answers right now, but the colleagues would like to answer, I think. Today, we are joined by Vasily Vashenko, expert for elections, Ranika Laputka, expert for elections, and Harold Epson, also international expert for elections. They will share their experience with us. And I think we may start if there are no objections. And today, now the part 1 of our discussion is devoted to the 6 topics like the election system, regular framework, organization of elections, registration of candidates. Let us start from the election system. Perhaps I will try to shape the tone of the discussion, and I tell for the very beginning, as the starters, that the concept of the code that is prepared, the system per se in the code is just not touched upon. really. We don't think that the election code or the people who will develop the election code are not the ones who will choose the election system. I think election system is a more political than a technical issue. And of course, it has its own technical legal aspects, but the choosing of the election system is merely a political decision and solution. And I can only state right now that now in the project of constitution for the new Belarus that is provided by the guidance of the representative on constitutional reform by Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, there is an elective system that is proportional and it includes several multiple mandate regions. And about this, we will speak also today about the pluses and minuses of this system. But first and foremost, I want to outline the fact that our idea is that we want to avoid the often changes into the elective system and into other fundamental aspects of the electoral process. I know that the Article 64 of the project of the Constitution is describing that the changes of the rulings in the law related to the system and to the rights, respectively, should be passed by the parliament or into next steps that will be defined by the elections into the parliament. But it is a good example here, but I want to know what our colleagues thinking about this. But still, I think it puts a good tone in protection for very often changes. So I think I may ask a question right now to the colleagues, and also let us put this into discussion. What do you think about this ruling? Is this not too forbidding for the change of the elective system or for the other elements of regulation of election when these amendments, certain amendments should be introduced? And my question is, again, what is your opinion related to the pluses or minuses of the system that is now proposed in the draft of the constitution? I don't know who would like to start. Vasily, Veronica? Vasily, thank you. Alexander, thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yes, I hope so. It's a very interesting question indeed, but I did not really want to comment on the choosing of the system per se, although I think this is a good example of a good solution, especially for the transfer period under democracy. But the mechanism, the constitutional mechanism per se, that is foreseeing protection, and I mean certain protection from the so-called changes or amendments of the parliament of the system, electoral system, for the needs of the parliament. I think the mechanisms is fitting here because there could be a politically manipulative use of the election system, and this is a wide phenomenon in the countries that are perhaps developing their democracy or in the countries of new democracy, youth democracy. And this mechanism provides for prevention of very often or very situation-related change and amendments in a sufficient way. I mean here the main pillars of democratic competence, competition and democratic struggle. And this is a great example here, a good solution. If a parliament wants to change the system, there should be a notion that it should be supported by the parliament that will be elected in next round. I think this is a good protection indeed, which is a kind of a good practice in several states. In Greece, for example, I could say, but there are also other examples, I'm pretty sure. Thank you. Thank you, Vasily. Veronica, please. And then Harold, I think. Thank you, Sasha, dear friends. I'm happy to see all of you here. And it's great that we are organizing these discussions, and I do hope that they will bring great and fruitful solutions for all of us. I would agree here with Vasily. And more, I want to add here that, in my opinion, if we will put this discussion on a longer run, we may also include different organizations that are interested, NGOs or interested persons and parties here too. That means we could include more this multitude of parties that can somehow influence the new legislation to be a mirror that would show all democratic features. That means independence in the first line. That means we don't need to be in a hurry. There is no need in a rush. We need to avoid any manipulations that unfortunately we can see, as Vasily told, in multiple countries. Half authoritarian or fully authoritarian when there is a transit of democracy and so on. Thank you. Thank you, Veronica. Harald, before I will let the floor to you, Harald comes from Denmark, and then in Denmark, the elective system is pretty much showing the example of this constitutional, but there is also mandate compensatory system. There is a voting not for the parties, but for separate candidates, and the votes for candidates are counted as the votes for parties. And more together to this, related to the stability and robustness of the system. And perhaps, Harald, you would tell us about the protection modes and how in the periods of transit this voting is working, and is there intra or inter-party party competition going? They're very, very good. Then we are not seeing only the struggle between parties, but also within the party. The floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you, Alex. I would say that I will speak English right now. Therefore, if you don't understand English, please choose the Russian channel for the interpreting.
The question. I will begin not from the Danish experience, but from the Ukrainian experience. I'm currently speaking on behalf of IFES. I'm based in Kiev, and I am with the IFES, International Foundation for Electoral System, the co-organizer of this event. I'm based in the Kiev office, and we have recently in Ukraine been through a discussion that resembles very much the one that you are having now, or are at the start of, which is the discussion of the choice of electoral system. Ukraine has oscillated between several electoral systems. They have had experience with the so-called parallel, proportional, and majoritarian system, whereby half of parliament was elected in single-member constituencies, and the other half was elected according to party list under a proportional system. We, as IFES and our partners in civil society, was sitting in parliament and decided that we should not have a fixed opinion on the choice of electoral system. We consider this basically a political choice, but we saw our role in informing the member of parliaments and the politicians who had to take the decision to make that decision as informed as possible. Basically presenting the pros and the cons of the different systems. I'm very glad to hear that in the Constitution and now you have kind of decided on a system that also the Ukrainian MPs ended up deciding for, which is a proportional system, but with regional lists, so that you use the proportional principle. You have a kind of divided the country into several constituencies, and there will be multi-member constituencies. In Ukraine, we have the same. The multi-member constituency more or less coincide with the size of an oblast or with the oblast, with a few exceptions. So I'm very happy, and I can say that this is also a system that I would personally favor for Ukraine, also because that, and for Belarus, because we have negative experience with elections in single-member constituencies. We have seen that they are prone to massive fraud during the conduct of the elections, and also to massive violation during the campaigns. We basically have also seen in the final reports of international observers that they have recommended to consider abandoning the majoritarian component. We are happy that this has happened. But there were things that needed thorough consideration before we entered up with the system. And I think I'm also lacking to see in the current concept, or reflected in your discussion, you may have had it, but it's not entered into your concept, that you need to decide whether you want to have open or closed party lists. It affects, it's a paramount effect how the voter will vote on election day. If they only have to vote for a party, i.e. the party decides the order of candidates, or if you want to have the voters to influence who actually get elected. And that was what you hinted to, Alex, that if the voter can influence who gets elected, then it will foster, or it will trigger, an inter-party battle between candidates within the same party, as well as a battle between parties. So it creates dynamics. In Denmark, we actually have the peculiarity that a party can decide whether it wants to contest elections with open lists or closed lists. So we have kind of decentralized or outsourced the decision to the party itself. In Ukraine, this idea of this liberal idea didn't have much success. The parliament wanted to decide what is the principle. But there's no agreement here. What is the principle? And we are currently having an electoral code adopted, where you have a system that will stand the test for the first time in 2023. It is announced and coined as open lists, but in the very last minute before the election code was adopted, Parliament, and especially certain parties in Parliament, decided to have so-called reserved seats for each successful party list. The first 9 candidates will be decided by the party top or the party conference, and will not be decided by voters. This is actually a closed list element introduced into an open list system. So you can say we have a hybrid version in Ukraine. And that is currently something that we are fighting against. As I said, we are still to see the first parliamentary election where this should be applied. But we are also working on amendments, and we have actually drafted amendments that will abandon these 9 reserved seats. We think it is undermining the right of voters to, or actually it will create an inequality of how candidates are elected. Some are kind of pre-elected if the party is successful, and others will have to gain voter support in order to get elected.
Mm-hmm. Спасибо, Harald. Я думаю, что...
Thank you, Harold. I think this detailed discussion of the situation in Ukraine is showing me one very important aspect, that although we have all these democratic achievements and the approach to the election in Ukraine, the discussion of election systems is not put on hold. Therefore, it's very important to see this protection from often change that was a part of the draft of the new constitution. Therefore, I think we have this consensus already that this is generally good outline, that we need to achieve to pass these fundamental changes by the 2 sets of the parliament, and 2 sets of the parliament should be delineated by the line of elections. And I see here one hand that is raised among the participants. Isaac, I think. Isaac, we may let you to ask the question because we have 5 more minutes for this topic. Isaac, the floor is yours.
Isaac, you have the floor. You can ask the question. Okay. Да, думаю, там было по ошибке.
I think there was a mistake. Therefore, we will switch off the microphone. And still, I have one more question related to the stability of the electoral legislation. So we say about the avoidance of the rapid change and often changes of the electoral system, but in the constitution draft, there are also notions related to the rights and to the shaping of the electoral commissions. Do all the colleagues agree with the precision of this formulation here of the wording? Because I am here a bit distressed by the topic of the behalves or capacities of the commissions. That therefore, if it turns out that in the central or the other commissions there are no additional powers, to change this will be not easy. What do you think about this? Vasily, perhaps? Thank you, Alexander. Indeed, there is an overall wording here, and if we speak about the electoral rights, we can agree with them and understand why there is the notion of this limitation of the electoral rights could not be passed very easily. But speaking about the powers, I think we could speak about the Central Commission, and this is the most important topic for the authors. I would guess it like this. And here there can be the fact that the powers would not be the main idea that is touched upon here, but the order of the election or shaping of the Central Elective Commission, because certain politic games among this would be this window or for step-by-step political affections on the work of the electoral bodies, which I think will be seen as a not wishful situation. Thank you. Do we have any other comments related to this, Veronica or Harald? Do you? Yes, I have one comment right now. I will speak in Russian. Really, I am fond of the things that all the powers of the elective commission should be outlined in a special law. Why, though? I think that the Constitution is providing for a framework for the work of the Central Electoral Commission. So the principles, that means principles of shaping of the Central Electoral Commission, and so on and so forth. But I think foremost, we need to see, and the Ukrainian experience is showing the powers are changed. For example, and by the way, later on today, we will speak about the digital voting also in Ukraine. We were changing the powers of the Central Elective Committee that, for example, the pilot projects and tests can be run on different new platforms, but I think it would be not so easy really to change the constitution because of this, to broaden their powers in this respect. Therefore, it's better to address the powers in a special law. Thank you. And yes, we've touched upon the Article 64 of the draft of the Constitution, but the article is related not only to the changes in the Constitution, but to the changes in the law related to the election. Even if the powers should be outlined in the law or in the code, this article would not make it very easy to change them. You will need two sets of parliament to do this. But I think we will speak about this later on. And I do like that, Harald, you already told about this issue, what and on which level should be regulated. And I think this will be our next topic. The question is here related to the law. And here we can speak about several moments. For example, here also in the concept we were speaking also about what should be stated about the development of laws, and and other documents, not only the code. And here I want to cut into the question of Adam Urslanov in the chat, related mostly to the elective system, but the essence of the question is relating to this question: how better would the elective system work under the circumstances when the parties are in the state in which they are right now? Let's get back to the question of the lawmaking, of the law, and the second topic. The key topic is, do we need to make a codex, a code here, or codify it, or we need to develop different laws for different types of elections, like one law for parliament, one law for president election, one potential law on how the central elective committee is working, referendum law, and it is also stated in the concept, and this is my idea also, that we need to come to the codification to avoid the counters in between different laws. And I think here the ruling on referendum should be also included into the election code. And I think that more we can speak separately about the question as several law on functioning of the central election committee. In different countries, I've seen that the code includes the rulings on different types of elections, but the functioning of the central election committee and other organs, other bodies are regulated by different code or by different law. Colleagues, what do you think about this experience, for example? And I think it would be also a good topic for our discussion today. I mean, the topic of what are the laws to be taken into account in parallel with the development of the code, and why. Who would like to start? Vasily, perhaps you? Alexander, thank you again. The question of quantity of the legislative acts and the grade of codification is certainly a matter of legal techniques, of tradition per se. And I think there is a certain reason for the countries where different types of elections are regulated by different laws, but still this creates practical complexes when there is one law and guiding law, and there is also a set of sub laws that are related to every type of election. And firstly, this is not so easy for the non-specialists to be oriented in this quantity of legal acts. And secondly, for the users, it's easier than if you have one code, one law, basically, that you open and you can read everything about the elective process. Therefore, I would agree here with the point that you need to codify at the maximum, including the rulings on the election committees, because this is not so... This is really easy to do within one code, but there are some questions that could be seen as a matter of the different separate acts. Speaking about the referendum, I know that there is one additional topic, but the matter of conduction of referendum in techniques, in organization of a referendum as the elective process should be within a code, the code. But when we speak about the rulings that are basically showing or defining when, why, and what is the initiative for referendums, especially on the local level, that have broad potential and that are not really used in the countries of new democracy very often, but they can regulate this as one sole question, and this is a matter of constitutional choice. And national referendums, the right of their voicing, this is the question that is rather constitutional. And I think in this term, the law on referendums can have separate, can be separate. Speaking about the other laws, law on political parties, certain regulation of political parties, and other inherent laws that are touched upon sooner or later. It's not obligatory for us to discuss all of them, but we need to take them into account. Thank you. Veronica, before I will let the floor to you, perhaps I will ask it like this. You're a specialist in matters of media, social networks, and these are the ideas or the places when the life is changed dramatically. How do you think in the electoral legislation, can we take into account all the aspects related to media, to social medias, or we need to put more attention to the separate acts and laws? Thank you, Alexander, for your question. And I really liked to recourse to the colleagues, to Harold, to Vasily also, and to say that, in my opinion, taking into account a negative experience in Belarus, I would say that it would be very important for us to have a separate code and separate law that would regulate the Central Commission and the other commissions, because this is how we could turn back the community to the trust and establish new trust at the setting of the democracy in Belarus. And more, when we speak about the other laws, I personally worked so much right now with the law on mass events, with the law on the mass media, and we know that two laws were changed, amended. It's not a coincidence. In 2021, it was the case because they are directly related um, to the political struggle, to the elections, to the connections between the people, and to other aspects that are necessary for referendums, for the elections. And therefore, Vasily was right here, because it's impossible for us to take all in our hands, but we need to put our dips on it. We need to pay attention to this. And more, recursing to your question, Sasha, about the media, I think that now huge quantity, many lands really try to develop mechanisms that would be adequate to take into account the rapid development of social networks, mass media, like to how to regulate what should be done with the internet. And I think we will speak about this in the next part of our discussion. It's very important to maintain the balance between the so-called adequate monitoring of what is happening in media, in social networks, and between the limitations somehow. We need not to be pushed into this mistake, what is done by the totalitarian regimes, like over control of mass media, over control of social networks. But at the same time, we need to show the things that can be really misused by the important players within the political field. Here can we say, for example, about the use of social networks during the period of the pre-electoral void, well, like additional uh, political advertising and so on, that is not put into the financial reports of the candidates for different posts during the election. And we need to take it into account, and we need to trace also the changes in the European Union of how it is done in the Europe, and we need to take into account also the last recent handbooks that was done by the OSCE, for example, in these matters. We need to look at good examples, good practices, but this is an obligatory work, and without this, I think, I'm pretty sure that we will be thinking about this and we will listen to our colleagues. So please, friends, please do comment. We need this. Shall you have any questions? Ask it.
So, Harold, the floor is yours now. How does it correlate? Yes, and how does it work? Well, actually, the Central Electoral Committee has the right during the elections and during the referendum. And if we are talking about the code, we have introduced the provisions on elections. And there exist new laws on the Ukrainian referendum and Now we are creating a local referendum law, and there have been propositions to include them on the work of the Commission into the code, and we have decided to leave it in the law so that the code will consider a certain part of the obligations and of the rights. And we have excluded it from the code and from the Ukrainian code on the referendum. But I would also like to add one important thing that can be also repeated. That is that the final stage of the elaboration of the code, the Central Electoral Committee turned to us as a working group in Parliament, and they said, so let us propose how to elaborate the law the way that all the provisions that have been excluded, the laws that have been on precedent, they would be in one book, in one code. Now, the code of the Ukraine is a part of the overall number of provisions, and 3 books are dedicated to the presidential elections and to the local events. And that means that, considering the practical point of view, the code is an easy one to use, not by a lawyer and an attorney, but a Central Electoral Committee reminded us that the elections day they do not just copy one book and that's it. And the commission must be part of the committee. So further, when we will be discussing it and the editing part of the code, it will be much easier to use. So if there is a law office, a law department, it is worth of being discussed during the code, that everything will be finalized and changed. Yes, that is an interesting idea. So if we are talking about the OSCE countries, the elections are being directed by certain codes. And that is one of the popular methods. And what I consider to be interesting is that in these countries where we do use the code, the legislature is not that big. So where the elections are being defined by more legislature, then international observers have more problems. So if we see the international one, so then the countries do choose not the best idea of regulating the electoral procedure considering legislature. So they find contradictions between these laws, and that is one of the most current ideas. So in future we should compare this experience. And that is one of the most important things to do. So how do we regulate the Electoral Commission? Then we pass to the next part. So if we consider the electoral procedure and the key organizational ideas, then what's the parties responsible for the electoral legislature? So I would like to pass the floor to Vasily, who is responsible for this topic for so many years. So Vasily, the floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you so much for such a possibility to present my conceptual vision that is based on the document existing. So considering the electoral procedure and the agencies and the body regulating it, It is the question that is quite discussable and disputable everywhere in the countries. In the new democracy, with the passage of democracy. And of course, that is a complicated thing to be discussed. So I will start with the new thing coming on which we have finally agreed. That is that we offer to step aside from forming the commission because of the political representation. That may seem a bit astonishing, considering the Belarusian context, where the representation of political parties and electoral committees during the long period of time has been the most painful issue. And actually the exclusion from the opposition, and considering the Electoral Commission, that is quite a painful thing to do. So why do we want to avoid this principle and to get away from it? That is the principle that we consider to be a bit optimistic, considering the wave of democratization that was quite large and was a basis for major documents that are not the starting points for the international standards in this sphere. But with the passage of time, it is well seen that at the first stages, this principle can play a very positive role. That means that the first elections are the first stages after the transit to the democratic system. Then afterwards, it starts to be transiting to something that we would like to avoid, especially the political actors that are not represented really well. No, they think that there are manipulations with their votes that are being miscalculated. So that is the politicization of the very idea of elections and of the electoral bodies is happening, and it can have a very negative impact. And it can lead to the impossible functioning of the whole system. And like that, the idea that we would like to incorporate into the context is that the electoral organs and bodies will not be formed on political principles. And we hope that they will be autonomous from all the political impacts and influences, and that they may have the guarantees of transparency. And thanks to that transparency, all political actors will have the possibility to see their voices are not missing, and then the work is being conducted easily, and that no one actually violates the rules. And so if we are starting from the head, we see that there is a three-level model of the Electoral Committee, which is very much alike to the already existing one. So we start with the Central Committee, then it will be formed by the Parliament. And the idea is that the nominees and for the candidates to the members of the Central Electoral Committee, though these people, these nominees, will be proposed independently or by non-political agencies and bodies that have the respect and the trustworthiness from the society. We had a very interesting discussion among the people that are trying to find some starting points and define which organs in New Belarus will be the organs that will have enough of authority and respect, and the deficit of the public interest So we have an open list of these candidates, of these nominees to the Central Committee, so they can be proposed by the Academy of Science, social unions of independent professions like lawyers, attorneys, notaries. So the judicial representativity is also important because in some countries, like in Poland, they played an important role
в переходный период. Мне кажется, сейчас
That's what we do during the transit period. Right now, conditions do not allow us to use to help them act as the bodies that may nominate people, so they are not considered as necessary. So the parliament confirms the whole list of the nominees. So these are the bodies that can do that. So we suppose that the whole number of the committee participants will be nominated. And there is at least one nomination cycle that will be quite long. That will be one round or 2 or 3 rounds. And what is also important here, considering the Central Committee, is that its members must have guarantees of not being rotated, which are pretty much alike as with the Supreme Court, in order to protect them from political influences and pressure that might arrive. And we also suppose that they can be half professional, and we can form the register of the specialists who can have all this education formation so that they would be ready to start their work at the commissions of the medium level and get enumerated for that. Of course, they're not supposed to work at the time in the organization, and they will work only during the elections organization. There is the idea that they can be formed just from the number of people who have passed through the basic commissions of the lower level. They do not preview the creation of the register or the pool of these people. And we consider that every time there will be an appeal to participate in it. And I think that a huge number of people will agree to do that. So actually, we hope that people, well, they lose some interest if everything just goes well. And of course, if there will be not enough people, and then we'll preview such a mechanism. So, well, we have these people we need. I think that I will stop here. I will be glad to answer to the question and participate in the further discussion then. Thank you, Vasil. So here we discuss it a certain number of questions, one of which is like that we would like to avoid the problems that comprise the politicization of such a question. And here rest a lot of questions to which we should find the answers. I also like to draw your attention to the comments that arrive in the chat. So here is the idea of creating the lottery at the bank of the candidates to preview. So it means that we just nominate them by chance. Well, I know there's such systems when the local representatives are chosen by chance, you know. And our political parties now don't have as many people to fill in all the electoral commissions. So I suppose that I'm being quite optimistic about the parties developing in future, but at the very beginning, I also don't see how the parties will nominate enough people for such commissions, and I suppose that here we are running a risk that bigger political parties will, thanks to such an idea, that they will dominate in commissions, but not only during the fight for the votes. So I see here the risk that parties can be of different sizes, and for many of them it might arrive that they want to be in the commission, but then they consider that they do not have enough places. So Veronica, you are working in the monitoring of the mass media, and I see that the monitoring methodology also previews how the commission works. So how often can we hear these critics like we are not represented well enough, or here the other party has all the numbers? Is that as a phenomenon that is well known? Is it something thought of? Well, thank you. That's an amazing question. And we hear that criticism quite often, and that is about the countries who pass through the transit. And there is kind of a fight for power. The Institute for the Democracy is not developed really well. They don't have enough of trust. And where politicians lately, well, their populism process seen, and people are being very much criticized. And the legislative bodies should do everything possible so that to protect such important institutes like from such a which is not based on anything. Yeah, thank you. Harold, the floor is yours, and I know that at the place where you work in Ukraine and in other countries too, the question of political representatives is an acute one. And we have an interesting publication on other countries. So all interested, please pay attention to them. So now the floor is for Harold. Yeah, thank you. You know, I'm quite an old man, and I'm experienced in Ukraine, starting from the 90s. So if people would have asked me, are you for the creation for the committee considering the political representation, I would say, yeah, I would have protected such an idea and supported it. But unfortunately, we see that what has been started really well has been changed and jeopardized. So now we see this representation for the parties that do not create the candidates or present them, but the only idea is to take part in this committee so that they would be able to sell these places to other parties. That means that the very idea provokes the political corruption and the money turnover that is not being controlled by anyone. They would also like to add that there is something connected, and that at the level of the local commissions during the parliamentary elections, political parties do not accept each other. That means that during the creation of the commissions, they first offer some, candidates out of nowhere. But after they win, they will put someone they trust. That means that there will be a lot of changes in this membership of the committees, and especially on the regional and local levels, where it will influence really much the results. So in 2013, the parliamentary elections and the percentage of these changes of the commission was something like 50%. That actually puts us on the clay of feet, the representatives. And now we would like to provide people with the trainings for such commissions. And that is something that starts at the very beginning of the procedure after the formation of the commission. So that means that its questions follow each other, and it has a very positive and negative influences. Propaganda. And that is also something that I consider to be one of the principles of the committee formation. So the political parties have a lot of possibilities to influence the committees. That actually means that even the members of the committee ask Parliament and to do that, and that the Parliament is being formed like that. But we would like to progress the committees on the lower levels, so that at least one member of it will be professional. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see the buyings, the logistics. And we should also add that they might also receive and get finalize all the reports on those who participate at it. And usual citizens do not participate in these procedures. So that's why I like the idea of creating the registers on the level of local commissions. Those being actually chosen as the members of the commissions. And we also add that it's not the first time we add it. So before the elections, we see that there is also a new idea of working on professionalism at the niches. So thank you, Harold. I liked really the idea for further discussions. These are the things that are actually about the changes, about the rotations, when the members of the commissions are being changed at the last moment, considering the political ideas, and the whole commission at the regional level loses its knowledge of the procedure happening before. And that is important to be taken into consideration if we are talking about the electoral system that includes the multi representativeness. And of course, that will play a lot of influence at the second level commissions, regional ones. And I would like to pay more attention to this idea, which is actually not always corresponding to the needs of the social desires. And we would also like to inform you all on that, and of course to influence it. I also have such a question. So maybe that would be the question to Veronica, to Harold, to Vasil, whoever would like to discuss that. So if we say that commissions are not formally being elaborated by the parties, they are becoming more professional. We have a pool or a register for the commission of the level. And of course, the parties will send their members to this education. Of course, you have large party, please help people to pass the education. They get to the commission while being educated. We think it to be okay. And as far as there is still the distance between a party and these people. But if the commission is being formed by a party, we know who is represented by who. And we say that is a communist, that is a socialist, that is from social democrats, from liberals or conservative parties. We know who is who. But if the commission is being formed in a free country, not from the party's representativeness, don't we run a risk that in commissions we will still have this party domination, but we will be able to say, but here are people who are social democrats or conservatives, and they are in alliance that they dominate the commission, because we will not have this link between a person and his party. But political interests might rest as far as people still have the preferences, and they can be helping people from a certain party. Isn't it still better to say, okay, fine, let's at least know who's who? Who wants to answer to such an interesting question? Okay, Vasily. Well, part of the question is something you have already announced. So considering the political parties and their development, such a huge supporters is not something you wait for each party. If we are discussing the new democracies, the countries I have been able to see, to consider the parties, of course, sometimes we just find people who participate in these commissions. Quite often, these are the same people that have participated at the observations, and they could have been representatives of the other parties. They just have the experience. And of course, that is the knowledge you should count on. Like, these people will use the knowledge they have achieved. And people will know how to actually help these people and to pay them back for that. That's just fine. But if these are the people who will work in the committee, who are just interested in it and in the electoral procedure, then of course there are certain visions and points of view. And the whole idea is that they are being there as their citizens. They pass their education, they work within the procedures previewed by legislation. They will answer for it. And there are political views of simple citizens or people who represent certain political parties. And they make part of the committees. And here I don't see any contradictions to that. Political ideas can be brought by people anywhere in their life, but they should, get ruled by the rules of work that will be proposed to work in these local commissions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Veronica, I see that you raised your hand. Alexander, thank you very much for this great question. And again, here I can only state the same as Vasily and approve his position and several ideas also here too. Theoretically, even if we will have a new reshaping of the political system, there is a small chance that in the huge quantity of commissions, we will have one and the same party, that on one and the same territory it will be dominating somehow, and so on and so forth. But here we need to look at what in this mechanism is a kind of priority in the mechanism of transformation. That means if we think on the basis of the resolution that the parties will be shaped according to the democratic principles, they will be oriented on different laws. This will not be pro-regime parties or nominal parties. And there will be no problem in it. That means that the representative of a party which already is functioning in a different paradigm, legal paradigm, political paradigm, I mean, they perhaps will be concentrated in several commissions. It can be, because Vasily fairly enough said, because it's the most important thing for them will be a political depth. And if we will be oriented on these values, I don't see any problem here. And again, I can prove this on the basis of my experience. In the countries when there is this political affiliation between the parties, inter-parties, very often people are just changing it, replacing it. That means as soon as our country, we will have some drastic changes whereby we will not have this crystallized system of parties and the parties will be changed. Therefore, I think that it has not so much sense here to be oriented on the party. Thank you, Veronica. I see there is a commentary. Marina Strachova is saying in all the system there are
що люди в комісії приходять, громадяни і громадянки, не представники політичної партії, наприклад. Ось, я хочу тут подкреслить, что я цалкам згодна з Маринай з гэтым каментаром, што ну, насамрэч гэта жыццё у вольнай краіне, калі ва ўсіх ёсць свае палітычныя погляды, яны з гэтымі поглядамі і прачынаюцца, і спаць кладуцца, і ў камісію прыходзяць працаваць.
Suggest that I share Marina's views that people have the same they can have different views and they live with that. And I had a look how members of electoral commissions are trained in Moldova and in Georgia. And this system is very developed there. One of the first issues is related of training, how people should relate to their duties. And it is this is stressed from the very beginning. You do not need to be a member of the political party. You do not represent any party, but you represent you represent citizens, not your parties in your country. You represent your so even if it sounds a bit well weird, but this is not representing one or another party. You represent people from your residential area, your fellow citizens. Yeah. So it's better to work for the community, not for the sake of the party. But it's important to stress the independence in the role of members of the electoral commissions, that they work for the profit of the people. Maybe the last question concerning the Central Electoral Commission, there is a question and there is a comment that in some countries there is kind of double structures at the level of the Central Electoral Commissions. In Poland or Romania, there is a two-tier commission that takes political decisions, but the organization of the electoral process is organized by territorial, which is called in Poland the National Electoral Body. So in Romania, a different name, there's a different structure that deals with the organizing of the electoral process. Colleagues, what thoughts do you have over this? How is it possible to guarantee the independence and to organize the independence of the electoral process if you have two-tier administration at the highest level? So isn't it too difficult in our conditions? Vasily, maybe?
I was thinking that Harald will be the first one to deliver on this topic, but still, okay. This is a great comment, really, and a great idea. These structures that we're speaking about, like Romania or in Poland, we are showing not this twofold or two-body structure, but there is the structuring of a central function, when the Commission is more an observer. It is following the organization of the process, but it is not into day-by-day actions or things like purchases and or certain organizational things. But the executive organ, as you were stating, it is organizing all this process under the surveillance of the Commission. In other countries, this is done by the Secretariat, the apparatus of the Central Elective Committee. And generally, this is the practice of operation of all central election committees, where 5 to 10 members are not dealing with the organizational aspects. There is an apparatus, secretariat of the Central Commission, which will deal with this. Do we need to think about its organization, for example, how it will be settled? Well, yes, I think so, because it's a very important part of provision for independent work of this organ, of the Commission. Without its apparatus, without the Secretariat, it cannot work as the independent autonomous organ, the body. I think this is a very interesting thing. Yeah, great. I think we will speak about this on the thematic topical discussion that will be devoted to the shaping of the electoral commissions, their structure. Perhaps we will also speak about the code, the terms of the code related to the regulation of functionalities and methods, so to say, the work and collection of people for this particular problems. And here we are speaking about the reform, about the state governance, and I think here we will invite the other analysts. So let us go to the next topic. We have 45 minutes. Before break, we have 3 topics, and I'm happy that we've invested more than a half an hour to this topic, but this is not the end of the discussion, because already now I see that we will have not one topical discussion related to this, but I'm grateful to you for rendering this topic from different sides and in different ideas. We have more questions than the answers. I think in several things we have a certain approach, but we're ready to discuss other points of view. And let us come to the registration of voters. And in the concept of the code, we see the idea on creation and use of united registry of voters on the level of the registry of citizens. I think this is the only way forward, and I can pierce the veil. Okay, there is nothing to pierce really, because people just forget about this very often in Belarus. And for many, when we speak about this, it turns to be the surprise. There is no unified list of voters in Belarus. There is no list of voters per se. We have many small, as of now, lists of voters, and we don't get any idea whether they are crossed or whether the person is in one or in several lists at the same time. And the system of control that is established right now, control over the lists, is radically different from the system of control that is existing on the registry level for citizens of Belarus. And I think we can discuss about this, or we may not discuss about this. I think many of you understand why it is like this, why it exists like this, but there is a fact. We have the things that can be done lightly, easily for new elections, to create a new list of voters on the basis of the existing list. And I think it's a good one, registry of citizens. And I think on the very initial step, and here I will ask the colleagues to amend me, the function for shaping of this list and filling it in, of course, on the basis of the data rendered for different organs, can be a part of the Central Election Commission, or it can be also outsourced to the other body. For example, it could be also certainly automatized and there will be a gist made out of the registry of citizens for the purposes of the elections, and it can be then easily communicated to the Central Commission. But I think at the very beginning, it would be very important to do this. And I think that definitely we will have to speak separately about the lists of inclusion and exclusion. But this is not a technical moment. This is more constitutional rights matter and matter for electoral rights. And the second thing, that last but not least, what I want to render for the discussion is as follows. Let us also speak about the publication, publishing and checking of the lists of voters, and on the level of permeability, on the level of the legislation to work with the lists, because here we have personal data. It's very important also to know from people from the civil society in Belarus, for the ones who are dealing with the data protection, personal data protection, if you are in the discussions. I think you are here also, and you are also invited to the discussion. But colleagues, how do you think? Yes or no for unified list? Is it easy to do or not easy to do? And what can be the potential risks with shaping of this list and with the work according to this list? Harold, perhaps we will start from you and your experience in different countries, because this is also a huge topic in multiple countries, in many countries when there is a transformation, also including from the digitalization, from paper to digital. And very often it is posing a question that the people are using only one list instead of shaping different lists on paper. Yeah, thank you, Alex. I also would put the accent on the quality of the registration, because everything depends on the quality of registration. For example, the data on registration, the data from the registry, if it is reliable, then on the basis of this, we really can make an extract or gist and name it like electoral registry. In Ukraine, starting in 2000, I was here when there was a discussion held whether they need to make separate registry or just to work on the basis of the registry that was made by the Ministry for Internal Affairs in Ukraine. And there was, at that time, there was idea to get several separate registry. And I see that this was a great success, really. And even now, until now, we are unified by all the names, names of the streets. The parts of the registry are held in paper and is somehow updated, but the update is not made very well, especially on the lowest level, and especially after the reform of the system of self-governance, which took part recently during the deficiency of budgets. Therefore, the quality of the registry, top-down, is not high. Therefore, the best registries in Ukraine are the electoral registries. But I would say the main idea for Belarus is who will lead this registry, because the registry for the Electoral Commission, it should be backed up by the broad set of powers to make it, to clean out the short-term registrations, for example. And I think this is the most important topic here. I would also like to switch to the other topic right now. This topic's name is who has right to vote where in Belarus. Because in the concept, I see that you offer to the voters the possibilities to vote at the registration place, and not only. And this makes me happy, really, because there is an interesting thing, like in Ukraine, when we're tearing the voters from their registration points. This was very acute after the conflict in Donbas region, and when there were internal floods of internal persons that were transferred. They went to Kiev or to the other huge cities, but they had the residential registration on the occupied territory of Donbas, and they could not use all the rights that are presupposed. And this was very interesting for us, but still we took off their rights from their registration, residential registration, and now also we are speaking about the displaced persons who can refer to the registry and be registered as the at the administrative address that can pose a difference between the address of residential registration. And this is a kind of a revolution for Ukraine because it is supporting the private initiative, and many migrants within the country in Ukraine are also from 3 to 6 million citizens. They are also included into the process, please. Yes, Harold. So thank you very much. This was a huge change in Ukraine. I do hope that we will not have the same situation with the displaced persons, and we will not have this necessity and also political dilemma on how to help these people to vote. But colleagues, what do you think about voting according to the place of temporary registration? Will it be no risk of electoral tourism, like the people will be temporarily registered to vote somewhere in the neighborhood, in the neighboring region? Vasily, Veronica? I can say, according to my experience, 10 years I've been following and I've been participating in the elections in Belarus somehow. And unfortunately, Alexander, there was a huge problem. And thank you for this right question, because we know this was used during the falsifications, that people were voting simultaneously in different places. And this is also connected to the absence of the unified registry. Therefore, it seems to me that again and again, we see many questions related to the political will, like for how all we, the citizens of Belarus, the organs, the bodies will be interested in efficiency of these laws, that the laws will be applied and that the rules will be also obeyed. If we will create the registry in the way, like when it will be fit for the use, I think it's very important for us to have this. But again, as you stated, we need to provide for protection of personal data. It should be in close cooperation with specialists in this field. It should be done. As you told, we have these organizations that are into this for a longer period of time. They can provide consultancy for our organs and bodies in this question. They are highly competent. And more, it seems for me that because of this, we needed to push towards this, because Ukraine in the previous year had the same problem here. And really, I think we at least should be very carefully in relation to this. If we will put into power this norm for voting not only at the registration, it should be still a registry that we need to use this, like to avoid twofold or triple voting. Thank you. Yes, I think it will be very important for us to delve into details about the voting, about the time of temporary registration, because we will need to use the possibility and to make this as an interesting trip for the ones who want to vote. Especially this is very important for the situation when we will have multiple mandate, huge circles, because there is the possibility of the fact that people will migrate to vote because their voice will be more valuable, if I may say, or more paid and better in the neighboring region, for example. And I think here we can also work with the voters. That means you could get also additional information signed by the voters, but they will not vote somewhere else if they will change their place of residence. And these are the lists that we will manage. And certain experts say it is working in multiple places. And there is also an extremal variant when the lists of voters are published. Who voted, who did not vote. In Armenia, for example, this was one of the steps that, yeah, for example, multiple experts said that this is a rather strange solution to publish this detailed data, masses about the process, but still we need to clearly see it. People have got more trust into the election process. But for me, until now, this is a strange idea. But let us come forward. And by the way, we have an interesting question here, which is really transferring us to the next topic. And namely, this is the registration of candidates. In the concept, we are leaving a little bit of possibility for further discussions about how to check the seriousness of the ideas of the ones who want to be as a candidates. We now understand that 100,000 signatures for one president is a bit too much. There should be, according to the good practice, not more than 1%. Less than 1% would be a good orientation mark. And they say, by the way, we don't know how many voters we have, 6.8 million. So 1%, 68,000, that means we can be oriented like at 50,000 of signatures. But this is not the only means to demonstrate the seriousness of your striving. There can be also some payment, additional installment, or you cannot choose for getting as much signatures as possible, but have their notarized or verified. What do you think about these methods? They exist in multiple countries. There are pluses, there are minuses in these methods. Therefore, I think we could invest some more time into this discussion. And basically speaking, I think this is a very important question of what is the registration of candidates and how to do it like this, that the candidates will not be shot off at the entrance, but the candidates would get a real possibility to work and to fight for their rights. And I think there are several aspects that are deserving some attention, but still, Vasily, perhaps you would add here. Alexander, thank you. Yes, I do have commentary, and I would speak about one more detail here as additional part of the discussion. The mechanisms for checking, as you told, of seriousness of the ideas of the candidates, of the striving of candidates, I would delineate them from the mechanisms that are showing that the candidate is using certain minimal support of voters to be included into the bulletin. Because we understand that during these processes, we are investing some public resources to provide for the elections, and this is a regular, normal practice for certain chances of people who are taking part at it and who can be really elected with good chances. And speaking about the signatures, I think this is a traditional means for the space that we're speaking about, Belarus and other countries. They were every time this mechanism of proving or disproving of support between the voters. And more to that, we see the mechanism of electoral pawn. That means a certain monetary sum that is approving seriousness of the candidate and which is then paid back if a certain percentage on the election is achieved. Not a huge one, like for example, 1% of votes if a person has chances to be chosen, elected. And there is the position that these means are excluding each other. And this is not my position. I still think that these mechanisms are pursuing different goals. If signatures, there can be not many of them. And signatures are still saying that the human being has the chance to be elected, has support, and the pawn here is speaking about the candidate's possibility to lead a campaign, to come to the goal, and not only use this for a certain set of other goals or ideas, like personal goals. Therefore, it seems to me that fair enough, we can use both. And perhaps a very interesting question is like how the collection of the signatures will be done and how they will be checked. And this is a painful question every time for our countries in post-Soviet region. So it seems to me, if there is a fair and minimal quantity of signatures, and if they are collected like in an easy way, in ideally way, perhaps digitally, then I think that mechanisms for registration of candidates, these mechanisms will be easy, will be accessible for provision of the right for participation at the elections. And here, of course, we need to speak what are the elections that we're speaking about simultaneously about the president's elections, where perhaps, in my opinion, there should all the means be included for running for the presidency. But if we speak about parliamentary elections, then again, this question is getting back to the system, closed or not closed lists, perhaps participation of independent groups, lists rendered by independent organizations, non-party organizations, or individual candidates, and more local level where we could have sufficient quantity of the signatures, like where we could state that people who are known, they are not, they should not be excluded into the from the bulletins, and that there is a reasoning. Thank you. Thank you so much, Vasily. And more, do we have any other comments? Because I am interested here really in one question. Speaking about the registration of candidates, very often we arrive at the question, like we are speaking about the resources, about the candidates, and are these the huge resources, or we may let as much candidates as possible to the elections and let the voters decide. We understand that if we are using or looking for the signatures, perhaps there could be multiple signatures possible, but we could make it very easy for everybody to be a candidate, and the people could then choose, or the great resources really indeed are invested for the candidates to be put through the campaign. Veronica, perhaps you could give us an answer, because very often the resources are spent in the media. What are the limiting factors to have against having the multiple candidates? Can you please say this question again? The idea is, why don't we invite everybody to the elections, like decrease the registration burden, 1,000 signatures and 5 rubles pound, and there will be the candidates, and in the list we will have hundreds of candidates, for example. Or there are some additional factors, limiting factors, like in media? Why? Is there a real limitation for the resources?
Well, of course, it all depends. And it all depends on the country. If we are talking about the agitation, the propaganda, what I see then, that is what we have discussed in Ukraine. And there have been a lot of candidates at the local level. And of course, the mass media still manage to represent various sides, depending on the parties they represent, some of which the candidates presented, so of bigger political groups, of business, like that. And in our time, we have social media. We can start your own campaign. And we have seen that in 2020 in Belarus, when the social media like Instagram and Telegram played an important role, had a lot of candidate info. And here we see the problem of the access to the data where the local and traditional media people watched it, they read it, and they transformed the social media at that time. And I think that now it's hard to boast that changes. And I think that from this point of view, this very sphere, this space, is something you should not, get led by, as far as we are talking about the traditional ways. That is Vasil who said that we should get led by them, because media and social networks can be used at maximum, no matter how many candidates do we have. And we should regulate it, just like how it is seen in traditional democracies, where these traditions are well discussed and these mechanisms do work. Yeah, thank you. That's a very good idea of how many companies are made that in online format. And of course, in mass media, the resource is not that much in demand, but teledebates for candidates are nearly impossible when we have 100. That would look strange, and we will not learn anything on anyone, So considering this point of view, I would say that covering of 50 candidates, that would be complicated. And if we don't do that, we will see that we are not treating them as we should. So, Oleg, you have the possibility to speak up. So please switch your microphone on. You can hear me well, yeah? Yes, of course. Yes, but the camera is not working really well. Yeah, I don't see how to switch on my camera. I can't find the microphone. Well, okay, so that is Oleg from the business committee. I just wanted to say that considering that, we must give the possibility people who want to ballot to do that, but there must be a certain mechanism that would control the unregulated number, that a tradition of becoming a candidate is something that you make choice for. They choose because of the biographies that they have seen at the description during the local events. That will have a huge number of people, of course, that will make the elections something that isn't by chance. And what we see in this very practice is that we should avoid this procedure of registration. And it can be kind of the sets, kind of an obstacles to overcome, so some technical problems that can be manipulated really. So what do I mean? That is giving the information on the money. So the candidates must provide us with the information on how much do they earn, and all that is being checked at tax bodies. That is just a tool of getting the information if we missed out something, and that is something that can be manipulated with to let someone in or not, and that must give us some objective criteria, like with the checking of the signatures, and there is a certain rule, like with the property. So if that has been signed by yourself or not, so there must be procedures that would control the reality of, of showing your own will of the elector who's proposing a certain candidate, but not, some technical bureaucratical issues to be solved. Because as far as we know, it is quite easy to manipulate with this data later when we get such a desire. So when we are talking about it, we should not see such obstacles. Thank you so much, Oleg. I'm very grateful that you have spoken up. That's great that you are with us as far as all these discussions, all the signatures, all the speeches. They are important considering our future uh, electoral procedures. There are a lot of elements we have been discussing with you today, and we should, of course, get people involved to discuss these recommendations and to work with you in further detail. So thank you so much. I agree with you absolutely. So there are a lot of demands, and too many demands allow us to manipulate with the data, and it can be well defined, and they all together can lead to the fact that there will be a huge set of tools that will be able to legally, say no to people who want to become a nominee and not registering something that is a tool of political fight for people who stay at the certain armchair and for those who want to get it. So I think that you should really have an understanding of, like, do we need certain registration criterion or not? But I think that we can also move further as far as the topic of the campaigns, how we hold them. That is, of course, the issue of registration. So there are people registering and who lead a certain company, and here there is another issue considering the regulatory procedures. So we should not stop really much. So on the usual, on the basic and fundamental freedoms. So there are mistakes of saying no to registrations during the campaign. That's one of the important elements. That is the participation of women as candidates. Shouldn't there be any additional support mechanisms of promoting people as candidates during their registration or during the electoral campaigns? Now I'd like to pass the floor to a person who knows it better, so that is Vasil. Maybe we will listen to you then. You mean both questions, like women and changing the campaign? Yeah, I think that as a lawyer, you have seen a lot of questions being raised like that, and legislative acts. Like there are always judicial mechanisms of helping and promoting women candidates. So yeah, both things, I think. And of course, that's what our audience will be grateful to listen to. Yeah, of course, I will start with the first problem, with the first position, that canceling the registration as prevention of political competitiveness being seen by many political parties, some of which are democratic. And that's where does it happen? So the very concept, we see that the registered candidates in Russia should have the possibility to be really competitive, to have guarantees to bring their position to the people, to get access to the mass media, and of course to the possibility of stopping them from being part of the campaigns. They should be minimal, and that should be really critical problems. Like, I mean, there is a lot of questions arising with the crimes and law violations. So at which stage must we do that? Because at some countries, people are guaranteed to promote their unavailability, and they're being protected from such manipulations, politically inspired accusations. And so I guess that here we still have a lot of things to think about. Here we just meet the position like say no to people to be part of electoral campaign. That is something that should be discussed really well. And if you're talking about women, considering the electoral system, we should discuss like getting the real representativeness. It is something we should think about. We should preview a certain level of guarantees being represented at political parties, and of seeing different mechanisms of how to achieve this gender equality and equal representation. That's a bit more complicated in presidentials, but as our recent practice has shown, that is something that can show us some serious issues and problems in society. But we think that the society is quite ready, that the women would participate in political competition and be equal with men, and we do not really need to think of any additional mechanisms. But if we are talking about financial part, and we have not discussed that, then that is something that really works, and it helps with some additional financing and gender equality in the candidates and the nominees. So if we are talking about some additional stimuli, I think that we should also come back to the violation of the resource dispensing and use, and what to do with the candidates that are already running certain offices. There is a little joke, which one is of my most favorite. So before we pass to it, I would like to give the floor to Maria Ruta, who represents the organization who defends the rights of women. So Maria, the floor is yours, so please, you can switch on your microphone and the camera, of course. Oleg, we understood how to do that. So if you will be speaking once again, we of course will surely give you the possibility to do that. Yeah, thank you. My name is Maria Roach, and I am for the FEM group of Coordinational Council. And yeah, I would like to add something on the women participation. And we, as a feminist group, we see the participation of women. It should be equal, and the participation at each level of the gender equality at all levels of the electoral campaign. And of course, what we see is that now, well, we don't have enough time to discuss that, but we hope that our group will make a part of this worked as part of the working group. So yeah, thank you, Maria. We will be glad to invite you to all our discussions as far as we have started touching this field, the discussion of this particular topic, but this aspect must be viewed at all the topics, considering all pluses, all minuses, advantages and disadvantages, like we are starting discussing women participation. And we should talk about equal rights. And you know, this violation shows that there is a prevalence of men, and we are trying to work on it and to change the situation. So yes, we must pay attention to the women's participation. Veronica, I see that you have risen your hand. Yeah, I also wanted to add on the women participation, as far as I also follow that Ukraine issue for several years already. And that's great that we are erasing this problem. As far as our society is ready, the fact that women would be more active, and when we will have political will, and we think that of course we will have it, we will have all the possibilities to be provided to women so that they would participate in all levels of electoral procedures. And of course, it's important to say here that there should be, you know, disproportion that we used to have, like we had quotas for women, and statistically, women didn't participate much during the legislative procedures that took place. And we had a lot of women at electoral commissions, but the heads of commissions were always men in such commissions. So it's important to see the priorities so that women would feel participants of such events with full scope of possibilities, and there is an agenda that we should add. Well, my both male hands are absolutely for it. So we still have some minutes, and it's important to listen to some international experience as far as we are fighting, like, you know, against people who are, you know, working on extremely complicated fields, and sometimes people who are presidents or prime ministers or leaders of the parties, and the fight against them is quite often something that these people are already there. They have this idea of using their state resources and their constitutional possibilities. And I would like to add to tell you a joke. And when I said, how would we see, how can we understand that you as a prime minister are not using your post while opening a school? So you are saying that you are a candidate while opening a school or not, but you are a prime minister at the same time. And then the prime minister tells me he's a man, you know. He says, well, that's quite complicated. When I'm in a tie, I'm a prime minister. When I'm not wearing a tie, I'm a candidate. Well, I think that's quite a funny thing that actually highlights how complicated it is to make this division, and how complicated it is to be impartial and stay a candidate when you have such unlimited possibilities in some countries. Use institutional possibilities. So Harold, maybe that's the last topic to discuss right now. We will come back to it, of course, if there will be any comments, but in international practice, does it happen really often? How do we fight against it? How do we confront it? So can we, you know, give holidays to prime ministers and presidents during the campaigns, or there is someone who should learn the country?
Distinguishing between the two roles of a head of state or a prime minister, and at the same time they run as a candidate. It's a matter of political culture in the end. I in my previous practice, I used to be good friend with a very good colleague of mine who worked in the German chancellor's office, and she was in charge of exactly doing that, telling him which expenses should be taken from which account when there was an election campaign. But I think that's certainly the best case, that there is somebody who is designated to help out the head of state or other leading position with differentiating between their roles during elections. It's a challenge for media. I think also Veronica should have a chance to address that, but a challenge for media to distinguish it. And especially, it is not only reserved to the highest position in the country, it is also candidates, incumbents that are running for a second term in office that often presents publicly funded projects as their personal achievements. It would be interesting to know that in Ukraine we have a law on the way that will prevent MPs from presenting projects funded by the public or local budget as their personal achievements during an election period. But I think you can, of course, legislate to a certain degree, but it ends up to be up to the political culture of the person, of the country in place. I often see that civil society and citizens observers devote a lot of attention to the issue of helping, basically monitoring and getting publicity to facts where MPs and leaders of the country misrepresent or abuse resources. I think law, yes, by law you can limit it, you can kind of try to limit the problem, but I think actually monitoring by civil society, citizen observers, and active media are the best instruments to prevent abuse of admin resources in the campaign. You can say there should be for members of the government, there should be for MPs, there should be a requirement that they step down for the time of the period. I'm fine, as I think you also suggested, to make exemptions for the president and for the premier, but it certainly just enforces that they should take measures themselves not to use their office for campaign purposes.
Спасибо, Harold.
Yes, Harold, thank you so much. Are there any other comments?
Да, у кого-то еще есть комментарий? Вероника, Василий?
Are there any other comments like Veronica or Vasily? Yes, Veronica, please. Well, that is a marvelous question. Well, as usual, in my experience and of my colleagues that are present here, that is the problem of violating the mass media resource in the countries with the transit period of their regimes. That's one of the worst issues, worst questions that has been criticized by international organizations who come to certain countries. So that's when the mass media belong to certain businesses, business groups, or to the state. They are being used and they are being violated by the people who are in power already and who that are launched at certain electoral campaigns. And I suppose that such an issue must be really paid attention to. So we as experts should discuss it and we should work on it. But on the other side, we should discuss this problem of political will, like when there are institutions and the mass media themselves are functioning correctly in the country, then politicians do not have this field for violations when all institutions are working. So when it is not present, then they have this field, and of course they have such possibilities. So it's important to take a look at other bodies, agencies, and to see the legislatures and to avoid such a thing. So that's what we see in all the reports on observations on criticism of this idea that is the mass media that is violating the rules. That's what we see everywhere. And Vasil, the couple of words from you, and then we have a little pause. Yeah, the topic is of vital importance. and is extremely complicated, as we have noticed. And I suppose that the starting point is something that Harold said, that there should be a very good understanding of the financial issue, because the violation starts from these financial issues, actually. And they can be from the party budget or that from the candidate foundation, but they can't be from the state or public budget. And that is the basic rule. And then it's not complicated, it's not very easy to regulate it really. And the examples that have been brought to our attention, they show it really well that it's complicated as far as these it's prohibited to speak about the state budget projects can be not a really good idea as far as when candidates can use their achievements, well, their achievements in public sphere or the initiations of some infrastructural projects. Well, what other campaign possibilities do they have them? Well, that's like bargaining to their electors. That's when people must show their own results in various projects. That's a very complicated thing to discuss, and a lot of things that must be taken into consideration in the future. Yes, thank you so much. And I'm glad that we are finalizing this block of discussion while talking about money, because our next block of discussions will be started with the money, as far as we are going to talk about the approaches on regulation of financing of the companies, and maybe we will also start discussing the question of the financing of political parties. So we'll have a 10 minutes pause. I think that we all need some coffee. I see that among us, there were a lot of participants from international organizations, representatives of various international social bodies, there are representatives of other countries, there are a lot of experts from the world of elections, and I see that there are people who are watching us online, and in 7 or 8 minutes we will be back. We will start the second block of discussion. So we're grateful to Harold, to Veronica, to Vasil for being part of our discussion. We will go on in 7, 8, maximum 10 minutes. Stay.
And yes, I think we may catch up with the agenda where we stopped. We were speaking about the connection between the regulation of the election campaign and regulation of the financing of campaign and financing of political parties. And here, while I was making a cup of coffee, I could remind myself of this often situation when the companies that have the biggest valuable cost, that means the campaign for running for presidents in the USA, many years ago, I was really impressed by how the control of expenditures on the electoral campaign for the presidents is done, where the presidents are using their presidential planes, for example, and they were saying that they have to use the plane flights, although they have to be paid from the presidency campaign, and they say each is included into the presidency campaign, and because they are presidents, they need to use this board number one, Air Force number one, and fly with this. Although I understand that this is okay with the money for them, but I think in our case in Belarus, we will not be very soon on this level of expenditures on the elections. But I think it will be very useful to speak about how the code would provide for the visibility of the means that are used for electoral campaigns. And at the same time, we need to take into consideration the necessity of this necessary fact for many candidates to be financed. For example, it would be very interesting for us to speak about this whether huge or not huge the role of money will be during the electoral campaigns, or perhaps everything will be covered by the activity of citizens. Okay, I think I can be a bit naive here. I understand that money plays a role, and this is quite a serious role, but still, I think we need to pay attention to the question, like how the state financing and subsidizing of the electoral campaigns will result in positive or negative effects. And we can also speak about the private financing. And here, at the same time, we need to speak about the issues from financing from abroad, because I think the situation in the world right now is that this matter should be regulated, and we need to gather this understanding why and how we can regulate this. In my opinion, I would avoid the financing of electoral campaigns and political parties from abroad, but I can provide for the physical entities, natural entities being financiers of the electoral campaigns. But speaking about the electoral campaigns, again, in our concept, we are having still a broad spectrum of capabilities, but at the same time, we think that we could do an indirect public financing, like free places for meeting with the voters, television agenda, but we can also push some room for the discussion within the discussion of the electoral code. But here there is a very important question, a question of control of the financing of electoral campaigns and how parties and candidates are using this money regularly, irregularly, within the framework of legal framework. If they're also only making expenditures in their money, then the state has no means to control their own decisions. But if the state money is involved, I think this should be very clearly regulated in terms of control of financing of electoral campaigns. And I think here one of the main solutions and decisions would be the choice between the proactive or reactive role of the controlling or a body. Who would it be, a central commission or the other governing body? And here I am more fond of this position, that the checking or body initially would not have a proactive function, but would have reactive function to react against the events and not start control according to your own initiative, because this can be an instrument of political struggle, where in one case we have seen the violation and in the other not. And according to our own initiated report, we could take off finances from someone and from someone not close it. As soon as we will take into account the credit of the credits in this new process, we will not use these possibilities for the further. So I was speaking about these topics and my point of view and what was put into the concept of the code. And now I would let the floor to the colleagues for them to be able to comment and to render some ideas. And we have one hand which is raised. But as of now, we will start from Vasily, Veronica, or Harald. Who would like to want to start? Vasily, the floor is yours. So with delight, I will cut in. Thank you very much. And thank you. And indeed, we were speaking, discussing, and there are some questions open. Why? Because a part of the matter, the financing of campaign is, as Alexander told, is combined with financing of the activities of political parties. It is direct connection. If political parties can have sources of income like only private financing, this is the one model. If political parties have subventions, state financing, this is the other model, which is bound to the other report and control, and so on. But I think that it's not so much to say against the fact that the limits for this expenditures for the companies could be. This is one of the mechanisms against the use of the same state resources, and that this limits of expenditures should provide for full-fledged electoral campaign, but at the same time they need to be controlled. Speaking about controlling organ and body, I am of the opinion, and you may be against this also if you wish, it's okay to use the central. It's not okay to use the central commission as a controlling organ because there are too many functions, also politically reliant functions that are a part of this body. Therefore, we need to think about the fact that it should be one and not one and the same controlling or body with the regular financing of political parties, especially when we're speaking about the models of state subventions, subsidizing, and their use. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think here, indeed, it's a very solid idea that for the Central Committee there will be a bit too much of political work and necessity of political choices. Therefore, here, I think it would be a sound idea to have the other control. Harold, please. Thank you, Alex. I would fully agree with Vasily. And I am also of the opinion that control of financing of the electoral campaign is out of the scope of the actions of the Central Commission, especially when we take into account the fact that they have be in control of the expenditures for local elections. The thing is that the electoral commissions, even if it helps on the local level, the commissions are not distributing these resources, and their capacity for this control. I may say here, I may be here on the side of Vasily, it should be done separately by a separate body that would simultaneously render control over the party's expenditures and so on. And we also need to pay attention to this, that political parties in electoral campaigns, they get means according to the special account, and they can have compensation for a certain campaigns on the other account, and therefore the people who are electing them will not have the information about the sources if not simultaneously the party would not declare where does the expenditure come from and how it is managed. And especially here, the electoral commissions on the local level, they are ad hoc working. They were not have this experience to provide for full-fledged control over finances. And here I would rather vote for creation of a separate body that is supporting the control over the expenditures and over subsidizing. Thank you, Harold. And I also want to state here that within the project of constitution, in the draft for new Belarus, there is this organ as the Committee Anti-Corruption and Ethics of Civil Service and Anti-Corruption. And theoretically, this body can have this scopes of work, and it's not easy really, because we have seen that very often the matters of financing of political campaigns and parties is one of the easiest questions here. But there are the other questions about state service and anti-corruption. That means the corruption, like, you know, of the bad type, so-called, it is not so easy, because if this body is subject to some pushing, because they can find, search, and punish the corruption involved persons, they can be then in the secondary way affected, because they are strong, they are fighting against corruption activities in the other sphere. But here we need to look in other details. I see here Lilia, you may turn on your camera and turn on your microphone. Just a second, can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you but not see you. If now I cannot find my camera, but it's okay. Yeah, okay, you can hear me. This is Lilia Shibanova. Yes. The biggest problem of our financing of the campaigns is bound to the fact that financing can be rendered by the legal entities. And here we're not speaking about state or non-state businesses. By the way, colleagues, I can remind you, Lily is speaking about Russian Federation. Yes. And so, as soon as there is the task rendered for any business structure to finance United Russia, for example, then easily there is the transfer of means. What have we faced here? We have faced here that multiple businesses are taking part at the state tenders, and they getting the million contracts. Within the million contracts, there are the sums provided, the shares from the contract that would be financed as the financing for the party. And this is the for the financing, the scheme. What can I see here? The possibilities of any business structure to render money for the campaign. How the decision is taken in this particular situation, because in every campaign there are funds, the right to distribute the income according to the funds, like private funds, funds for refund, development funds, and so on. And only later on, you can pay the taxes for the state, and only later on, the rest income can be then somehow redistributed. And this redistribution should be backed by the decision of the board of directors in the company, or by the gathering of the company. And nobody is controlling it. But what are the funds that are used? How is the case with the taxes? Are the taxes paid or not paid from this sum? How the money came to this electoral campaign? Therefore, in my opinion, in the law, there cannot be at all financing of the electoral campaign on the cost of the legal entities. Natural entities, okay, it's your money, personal money, you can use it and you can then redistribute it according to your taxes that are paid. We understand that you have the source and you are entitled, but legal entity is an absolutely closed scheme, and it should be closed and banned through the law, by the law. Thank you. This is my opinion. Thank you, Lilian. And this is a very useful point of view, because the context can be pretty much similar, although we can say that in Belarus, there is not so much money as in Russian Federation in circulation here, but we have a little less scale, but the concept is feasible and very interesting. And everything very often is then the subject of the political voice that is there, like the decision in the USA that business can be of a political standing. I can have a doubt here, but we can discuss additionally the possibilities of financing of electoral campaigns by legal entities. In the principle, I don't see here the problem. Practical problems can be the case, but practical problems can be solved. I mean, it's not only by erasing the questions or by erasing the possibilities. Vasily, please. Thank you, Alexander. And indeed, there are some root problems that need to be touched upon, and Lilia was speaking about a part of these issues. For example, decision making, especially decision making within the campaign, is depending on the organizational structure, who is in charge. If this is the huge enterprise, the shareholders can then decide, or it can be decided by the board of directors or by a solely decision of the director. And this is only a peak of the iceberg here with this participation of legal entities. In the Council of Europe, this is not greeted, and the recommendations by the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe are strictly negatively opposing this participation of legal entities in financing, and they are not accepted. They are banned in multiple European states. Only physical entities, natural entities can insert the money in this way. About America, this is just the other situation, separate situation, and the huge inputs of money are coming from the companies, not into the electoral fund, but to the special funds that are created to run the campaign for the benefit of the candidates, but in theory, they are not coordinating their activities with them, like super PACs, who are financed very often from huge corporates. But this is the other topic. Yes, I think, Vasily, you were speaking about one important topic that should be discussed, especially financing by the third parties and campaigning on behalf and for the benefit of the candidate, but not by the candidate or by the party itself. And this will be a very interesting discussion. By the way, I think we can listen to the business community here. It's interesting whether they want or don't want to finance political subjects and parties in the future, and what could be our arguments for the benefit of this decision. Let us look at the financing on the other side. Next topic, huge amount of money is invested during the electoral campaigns in media, coverage in media, advertising, and also in some paid sujets in newsreel or in the name of the journalist, what was like a jeans name in Ukraine, and I think it became an international slang in electoral world, but still huge money is paid for coverage in mass media. But this is not the only one and solely role in media in the campaign and coverage. I think I will let the floor to Veronika directly, and let us speak about how you could provide for basic framework of mass media during the electoral campaign, and what would be the elements that should be taken into account in this regulation. Veronika, the floor is yours. Alexander, thank you, dear friends, dear colleagues. A very important topic, because we see that the role of mass media is ever growing, and especially it was seen by within the period of pandemics, when very often the pre-electoral work, because of the limitations by COVID, it was not possible to render it full-fledged with mass gatherings and so on. And many things were transferred to the mass media, to the networks. And in 2 years, we see that mass media, social networks, social media have become very important in these ideas, in these matters, in multiple elements of coverage of campaigns and so on. Therefore, we are paying huge attention to this particular element. We'll look at what is happening with the legislation in terms of media in Belarus. And here, in our concept, we have paid the attention to the factor which is necessary, and it takes into account the rather negative experience of Belarus in this regards. And I will tell what is this. At first, of course, it's very important for us that the regulation of mass media would be provided in a fair mode and within the limits. Our concept is to have more freedom and less regulation. because Belarusian mass media is existing, especially in the last 2 years, under the harsh situation. We need to take this into account. We will provoke and help, and how to get back to the market. And the second moment, which is very important for us, is the access to all the interested persons and parties to the media. We don't want to have any cleavages as it was before, like there was a monopoly for mass media, and this was the tendency that is right now not only in democracies, in young democracies, but it is also taking place in the countries of the Central Europe. And this is also very important moment for us, that the mass media would at its maximum and at all costs give to all the interested sides and parties to take part at the electoral campaigns on different steps. And for this, we need to take into account the fact that the media and the media market should be at its maximum visible and free, and support the work of journalists in small editorials and in a bigger means of information. And the third element, as Alexander said, is the political advertising. In Belarus, practically, it is absent. It is not existent in the mode which is accepted in the other countries. And because of the previous monopoly related to the media that was backed by the state, and the access to the independent mass media was limited. Independent media tried to provide for coverage, alternative coverage, but it was not so easy for them, because the work of the media was like a life on a minefield. Step to the right, step to the left, you arrive at the ban. And unfortunately, new laws, I mean law on the mass media that was passed and promulgated in 2021, it made the work of media not so proactive. It limits the field for maneuver that would be provided for the media, and especially, I mean here, digital resources and digital media. And now today we see more limits of the law posed by the law for the media. But please don't remember that multiple journalists are unfortunately imprisoned, and of course this should not be the case. And the fourth moment, which is very important for us, and here I think there will be so much space for the discussion. I do hope that it will be the case. We all wait for it, because this is what we are planning, and we count on the fact that we will have a certain body that will render the monitoring, like how the campaign is done within the mass media. And this organ will also consist of the journalist organizations, of the representatives of the legal society, professional journalists. It will be a maximum inclusive from all the sides. And here, of course, we will look on the other countries and everything what is happening in the Central Europe is what is happening. That means we will look at all the examples, we will work on it. And number 5, this is what we will have to take into account, like how the campaign is ran in media, how we can regulate the media and non-media sources that are not equal to media, but there is a political advertising, and there are many, especially many burdens for the traditional media and for traditional campaigns, and we will take a closer look at this. Because as we know, the independent media, many independent media are coming to the social networks to exist, to provide for the function of the access to the information. And there could be also political advertising done, and we will take this all into account. I think briefly this is my idea to this topic. Thank you, Veronica. I will not add anything to this, but I wanted to ask one small question here. Perhaps, Vasily, you will be ready to answer this as the legal specialist. So I see a reason for regulation of mass media, apart that certain mass media are using some social resource as frequency, like radio, television, broadcasting. They have limited resources. What about the press? They have limitations or not? You may print, you may not print something, you may run a blog. Why do you need a regulation? Or there is some other communal interests for a certain editorial policy for mass media that is not using the resource?
Ой, какой непростой вопрос и какая непростая тематика. Но спасибо за
It's
него.
quite a complicated issue.
Подход к регулированию
But the approach to regulation of mass media, of any mass media, at the electoral period must balance several interests. And of course, that is interest of the freedom of speech, and of course, that is the free exchange of views and the electoral ideas. And that is the first principle that must be followed. So then that is the resources, the history, they are like what we mean that the broadcasters must do.
Это не всегда означает
During the
равно.
balanced approach. It doesn't really need that there must always be equal approach. There are candidates that arise more interest and insisting that everyone must be equally represented. That is too much on editing limitations. But a certain balance must be followed. Following it, as Veronica said, that is the self-regulation by the certain body who must have a certain leverage on control. And these leverages are like, they must not be helping these freedoms. Considering the resources that are not limited, printing press, and that is considering the limitations just for the hatred rhetorics. That is prohibition for such hatred. In other things, in other aspects, this principle for freedom must be the ruling principle. And that is actually what we need to discuss. Considering the international perspective, that's something that we may see, but we might not have enough time. Topics that usually arise, a lot of things to discuss. And I would like to sum up that considering our discussion on media, it would be really important to see how to really regulate the broadcasting so that it would be both honest and interesting. Because honest is not always interesting. And making a choice. Well, last point from Veronica, and then let's go to the further discussion. So thank you so much. So I suppose that what we should discuss that is the balanced coverage and no discrimination of any interest and the lack of information and a certain balance. As far as Vasily said, there will always be candidates that can be more interesting destinies who are just more active, and they will be covered in mass media more. But while doing the monitoring, you can always see this when there is a thing. Not like someone is less interested, but there are people who have more connection with business structures, like a state public representative who have this specialists, and when we see this connection, so there must be this balance which should be proportional. Thank you. When there is no such balance, the final idea is that there are people who do the appeals, who start the complaints. Sometimes there are different bodies who work on it, but we are sometimes going to see various disputes and conflicts being debated. And I think that is one of the moments it's not being really well discussed here in Belarus, because sometimes you don't even come to the debate because sometimes it's not worth starting it. And I think that in future it will be just normal to see that during the elections we will have these debates. Because if there are no discussions, no disputes, then something goes wrong. So that is the idea of how to find the solutions for disputable questions. That's what interests us. That's the conception that we are interested in. So, colleagues, you can also ask the questions, leave your comments. We will not answer all of them, of course, but we take them into consideration. We are trying to discuss them. So, Vasily, please, the floor is yours.
Спасибо, Александр.
Yeah, thank you, Alexander.
Может быть, просто все очень хорошо. Если в Дании их очень мало, например...
Maybe everything just goes well. If the Danish do not have much of them,
можно спорить по другому поводу, а по поводу организации выборов споров нет.
Well, we can discuss that, but there are a lot of quite debatable questions here. And if we are talking the Western Europe and other regions, then that is the regulation issue. So how would they be efficiently different so that all the disputes would end up by the real legal representative and representation and protection? So that everything would just go the way it is supposed to. So I suppose that we can pass. We should see the real existing practice, considering which all these disputes should be viewed by a commission. So the concept is a bit different. So how do we pass to the judicial way, how do we go legal? So how do we organize the electoral procedure? So if there will be any disputes, any problems about how do we hold the electoral procedures, so that should be the administrative way of viewing such appeals, and they will be seen in court. So we can use various models, and we see that Belarus is quite a small country, and we can unite all that in just one court that would be specialized in it, and we can create such a court during the electoral procedure. And considering the very idea that exists as the concept, it can be created from the supreme judges or from the medium level, just starting with the regional or territorial level. So this would be judges who will be chosen for one specialized court, a set of people who will work in two instances, in two levels. And the first one there will be from 3 to 5 judges, and the plenary session that would view the appeals and draw the final conclusions and judgments. And so that is where we should think more and see what complaints do deserve being viewed in two levels, because the major number of the discussions can find solutions at the first level, and not all of them must be brought to the supreme instance. So that is
рассматривать споры, жалобы и обращения на низшем уровне и на среднем уровне. Этим будет заниматься ЦИК в отношении только избирательных комиссий, а все остальные жалобы на других участников процесса, на ход избирательной кампании, на государственные органы, на кого угодно будут рассматриваться в судебном порядке в специализированном суде. Пока представил и готов.
Спасибо, Василий. Это я понимаю прекрасно по опыту своему тоже, что это довольно неортодоксальное решение. Оно по формальным признакам соответствует полностью международным стандартам, а в частности тому, что должно быть судебное обжалование, возможность судебного обжалования административных решений. Но я тоже вижу большой плюс в том, чтобы разделять функцию администрирования выборов от функции рассмотрения жалоб. Тот набор навыков, который нужен членам комиссии для того, чтобы проводить нормальные и честные выборы, совершенно не обязан.
The set of what we need to have the legal procedures is not something that we use for the seeing the complaints. So these competences are quite different. So what does Harold think from the international point of view? Like, how does it work in other countries? As far as you are working a lot in Ukraine, so how does it work there, that court system? I'm sorry about Ukrainian colleagues, but we are addressing to the Ukrainian experience, and Harold is there. So while discussing the other countries' experience, we sometimes see negative examples. It doesn't mean that in Ukraine you have a lot of negative things. No, in Ukraine everything goes well, but sometimes the most bright examples are not that positive. But we are grateful really to our neighbors for the experience. So we are sorry for that, and we pass the floor to Harold for international prospects on this idea of courts claiming. Thank you so much, Alexei. Thank you so much for such a balanced view about this balanced idea and the balanced view of Ukraine. I love the idea that is explained in the concept that would allow us to find the solutions for the problems that we view and to see this system working. To each 3 or 4 years, we will have to understand how to work with the electoral claims. That is lack of experience in usual courts and the specifics of the electoral cases. That's what bothers us. So that's what we see quite often. That is the lack of this experience. And sometimes we have contradictional solutions by courts in the same cases. And I suppose that the creation of a special agency, special body would help us to avoid such consequences from the low level of the judgments and legal cases. And I think that's why we should welcome it and create such a court body. But the only idea that a bit bothers, that a bit questionable, if I understand it correctly, is that the formation is kind of a lottery from the judges of two levels. So does this body stays, or is it recreated during every procedure, or is it just a principle of formation that is done once and forever? As far as otherwise, there is a problem arising of losing the experience. That's what I think. That's interesting to listen to the Vasil's opinion on it. Yeah, I think I will answer to it right now. That's something we have been discussing, and that's necessary to make these things meet. So what we need to see is that we all should have the experience, that all the judges should have this experience. We also would like to protect it, and that's quite a problematic thing. And so that is, these are politically complicated things, which are not easy to find solutions to. So that would be a new set of judges for each electoral cycle that would be defined as national elections, and that it would be changed for every electoral cycle. And so now losing it must be compensated by the practice, the body that must be printed regularly, and that would be kind of a starting point for the further legal solutions and for creation of the unanimous provisions. And we hope that like that, would be able to compensate the new number of judges. And it would be better if it is the new number of people, as far as there will be not a burden to bring. And it would allow us to not to have this absolute centralization. And if that is the only court that would work on it, these judges will work long enough in it, and then there will be certain passage of time that will make this burden even stronger. Yeah, you know, I will support this thesis that dividing it, not giving just one court such a function, that is protection from a certain set of risks, certain mechanisms that allows to make an appeal to the Central Committee that it would go to the Supreme Court. And there is a standard system that works, that if there are standard courts of the lower levels, it still goes to the claims, to the appeals, in a certain iteration to the same Supreme Court at the place where the Central Committee takes place in the capital city. And here we see there is certain desire to influence the electoral procedure by influencing this court. That is becoming more politically partial, but not impartial during this political fight. And here we should see all advantages and disadvantages of such an electoral court that is being formed from individual judges, like proposed in this concept. But we should also pay attention to the idea what is an electoral cycle, as far as life is more complicated than electoral cycle. And it might happen that after preliminary we will have these changes in the cycle, its legitimacy, and of course we should pay more attention and time to the discussion. But considering it, I would like to say that we still have one more question to discuss. I would also like to say that to discuss how, at which level, at which stage should we create the protection for constitutional rights and freedoms that are connected. We have this constitutional claim, and during the elections, we are still seeing if there are any possibilities to raise electors and see the procedures and to see how this participation not connected to it is connected to some fundamentals. And if that is the court that should discuss it, or there is a certain role of constitutional court. So what do you think? So Harold, Vasily, Veronica. I can start, so if there is any other point of view, please welcome. That would be interesting to listen to. So considering the procedure, there are questions. We are protecting the constitutional rights, and those questions might arise. And such a court must be able to come to a constitutional court, and we will be able to think considering the terms of seeing these claims. They must be viewed really quickly, and at the same time, we should see that it would be discussed, that the Constitutional Court will come to a certain idea, and it will have more time to have a solution for a certain issue. So I suppose that the constitutional rights and other questions will be seen and reviewed. Yeah, I guess that I can agree on that, because there are actions, there are questions arising here. The constitutional court sometimes they can't work within the terms that are really needed during a certain electoral period. And here I think we should somehow think like how to protect the fundamentals and work within the terms needed. And it's not a very easy thing to do. And sometimes we see that it rests, because life is, much more complicated than the law. That's what I repeat, and that becomes even more evident. You can't just think of everything. And I think that we will have yet a lot of debates on it. Our next discussion is like the new discussion issue. And we will have something like 15 minutes to finalize our discussion today. And the topic of the day, methods of voting and calculations, well, we can pay more attention to it. And I think that we may keep discussing. And that is for the observers, for the representatives of the mass media. So considering the topic and considering the political party role, we have a certain idea that when we want to make it depoliticized and more professional, then it must go together with the guarantees representatives of the political parties and control the actions of the Commission as the de facto observers and the representatives of political parties, whatever you call them, and get the copies for the documentation and be present at all the procedures at all the moments and regulate the rights of the voters and to support your idea and your thesis on depolitization and professionalizing of the committees. And that is kind of a practical outcome for making it more transparent. But considering common discussions, should be highlighted that we should define in the code the free access to the data. So we must have all the data at the legislation, get the copies of the protocols and all the solutions, and we must keep the restrictions and the prohibition for the agitation of people call themselves as international and national observers. And of course, sometimes it's you who controls it. And sometimes you do the agitation and propaganda, but you must stay impartial if you're an observer. Because sometimes that is just the idea that allows to fulfill a certain mission. So in my practice, that's kind of an often question asked. So if I am, as a national observer, have my point of view, so how can I abstain from agitation if I am already politically active? I suppose that that is also a question of political culture and how does it actually function? Because sometimes you know how to distinguish these various parts of being people who discuss problems with their friends at the coffee, but here it can be kind of a complicated issue to discuss. One of the guarantees of access that would be access to some electoral procedures that arise most questions. That is the elaboration of the committee and the calculation of the votes. And that is one of the issues we're going to discuss in the calculations too. But I think that's also a very important aspect that we will dedicate time to. And that would be the space at the code and the calculation of the votes. So that these are the questions and the approaches. But for me, that's kind of evident. That is the transparency principle and the openness and access to the data. So dear colleagues, if you want to add something, maybe Veronica or representatives of the mass media or people who are participating within the other options and competences. So please, Harold, please. Yes, I had just one idea. That is the Ukrainian experience. So that is the organization of the society from the civil society, and these are the observers that are being registered at the local commissions. That must be seen, that must be viewed, that actually sometimes we observe such cases at the Central Committee and during the creation of the local committees. And we have found a solution, not the perfect one, of course, but well, in Ukraine, we also had a certain role for the commission for the voting abroad, so they could have registered within the central committee. And that's what should be viewed during the registration. Yeah, that's an interesting question. The level of the registration. And of course, that is something to be discussed. That's what we tried to solve during the first honest elections procedures, because observers arrive here only when the commission is being formed, because it is the commission that does the accreditation for the observers, but before the commission, there is none. So we have allowed the representatives to be present at the commissions dedicated to the creation of the commissions. In future, we should see this possibility to accredit them the whole period of forming, so that they would be not just like the de facto observers, but the jure representatives of civil society. They should always be observers. Yes, Veronica. I'll just add on the observation that we have discussed it really quickly, but that's important for Belarus. So we have discussed it for the last decade, and we are discussing that mass media information. So we shouldn't repeat something that happened in 2020 during the period before the agitation, when the mass media representatives were arrested, and what happened during the arrests. So we will do everything so that the mass media will have the free access to various stages of the project, and that is of vital importance.
Thank you so much. I would fully agree here that media will play a huge role in the honest elections. And again, honestly speaking, the first that I want to wait from Belarus is a very rapid multiplication of good, high-quality media, because there is the strive for information. It doesn't need for gigantic investments, and citizens' journalism will show its depth. And there is an interesting question about video control of the activities of commissions. How do you, colleagues, see video cameras on the places of voting and on the commission's sittings and meetings? I would say the direct broadcasting of Central Commission is a good idea. By the way, this is the publicity, and this is a rather positive thing of COVID pandemics. Many commissions started to air their sittings in online, and they were previously not eager to do this. Then life has forced them to do this, and I think it will stay for a long time with us. And I think this is a great idea. And what about the middle level? I think we will discuss about this. What about video cameras? What about video cameras? I know pluses and minuses of this. Harold, perhaps you would start. I would fully agree in this with you about the airing on the mid-levels in the administration of these events. I don't know. I'm against the cameras on on the direct points, because this is providing for the false glasnost, so to say. Because every time, everywhere where there are manipulations are made when the camera is not working, or suddenly there is a break in the camming. And this is just a false warranty here. And I would say that there could be just many misunderstandings. And more, this will affect some voters, and I know many voters are not eager to come to the some projections to some airings. They need additional intimacy. And it's not so easy to assess this, but still, because the voters are executing the rights, their solely rights and their freedoms there. And of course, there are some additional issues related to violations of secrecy of voting. Thank you, Harold. A very interesting point of view. Veronica, I see your hand is raised, but before I will let the floor to you, I would say that there are some more opinions and for and against, because Lilia, who was speaking recently, she's saying that yes, she is on this side. So I think I would be unpopular here, and I would state the same as Harold. Video cameras are not every time putting stop to the misuse, because we can speak about the things when the cameras are put off, but we may recall the last elections in Russia in the last years. Nobody is afraid of the cameras. There are additional frauds, and nobody is. The thing is the comfort of the voters, especially in the countries with the democratic transit, and there is a huge issue here. I think we could render some consultancies with the specialists related to the personal data protection. I think that people, especially the elderly people, the ones who can remember of the Soviet Union, I think in the post-Soviet countries, this would be psychologically not comfortable thing to vote under the cameras. Thank you, Veronica. And Lilia, you're reading just my mind here, because one of the arguments for the video cameras at the endpoints is that you may collect and fix the facts of violations. But in my opinion, frankly speaking, I would honestly be on the side of no cameras on the spot, because I also think that the facts of violations are not somehow countered. There are many other methods how to make these crimes also in front of the cameras. And very often people are not afraid of the cameras. They make the offenses, but this is rather a pathology. But very often people are a bit afraid of the cameras, but still they are somehow committing these crimes. And plus, to these cameras are just a short way to the thing, just to say, why do we need observers? There are cameras, you can be an online observer and monitor everything you want. These are the risks. And at the same time, I do understand that in certain contexts, cameras can add this element of so-called additional trust to the things that are happening there. Therefore, we can also discuss this as a concept, but still, together with the concept, we could speak about the policy also, like where does it come and why do we need more trust to this process. This is just one of my principles here to discuss, but I'm ready to discuss it further. Veronica, I see your dibs, but we will come to the next topic. Okay, please. Yes, you were just speaking also my truth here, because a good professional observer, in my opinion, are better than any camera, because camera won't fix many things that are in the documents by the observers. There are some moments, there are some fine lines that are registered by highly qualified people. Thank you. So if we are speaking about the cameras, it's the highest time to come to the question of the organization of the voting day and the fact of voting per se, and counting and collection of the results, and so on. In our concept, we are discussing, and again, I don't think that this is this is a rocket science in technical view. There is a good practices set in the whole world, how the work is organized at the day of voting. And there are several principal moments. The first is the first moment that we are putting into our concept is that the voting should be done only at the day of the elections day. No premature voting. I think we don't have this as a major need. Then I am of the opinion that the voting should be possible also not within the sector, but here we need to have the criteria. There are some people who are immobile and who need to be served in this term at home. And the third point here, which is stated in the concept, is directly relating to the accessibility for the people with handicap. And I think here within the code, we need to fix the criteria for the accessibility. And here I will be happy to be joined by the colleagues from the organizations supporting the rights of people with handicap, for them to help us as the experts, like how to write it out in the legal framework. And we, as the people who are dealing with the election, will help them to formulate it for the context of elections. Therefore, here we have some possibilities for cooperation. And the next topic here, I think it's necessary for us to make what we've already fixed in the sublegal act for the first elections. That means the protocol that will serve not only as a document about how the calculation was done, but also it will include some checksums, and it will show the real process that was directly at the day of counting. It's just not to play with the numbers, but to show in the protocol how the process was effected. And further on, I think we can understand that we have to have some possibilities for recounting, recalculation, and in the code, there should be some rulings about data storage, the materials like critically important materials and non-critically important materials. There are different forms and norms for this. And one more question that is not rendered in the concept of the code, but still, I think we should speak about this today and understand, let them understand why it is not in the code, is the digital voting. I know many people won't think about this, but I deeply think about this, that we need to have the first elections without digital voting, but then we could experiment with the digital voting. And this is the outline that I made as the concept for the new code. Then, distinguished colleagues, your comments, please. They are welcome. Vasily, perhaps we will start with you. Thank you, Alexander. And yes, indeed, the process for organization and for calculation technically is not rocket science. That means all the complexities are the work that it should done for the open way of work. When the commission just wants to count, but not to make a fake, then it's easy. And the main warranties are here, as it is stated, warranties of permeability, fully open calculation with demonstration of the bulletins of the ones who wanted to look and see that the bulletins are counted as they are mentioned and as they are marked, and so on. And speaking about this premature or early voting or other alternative forms of voting, these questions are somehow related to the topics that were discussed previously. At the presence of the registry that is trustworthy and centralized, at the presence of the lists and system of accounting of those who voted, when voted, for the people to not have the possibility to vote twice, there can be a different organization of different alternative means to vote for certain reasons, for the people who cannot, for certain reasons, come and vote. And here, there is the question on the trust, social trust. Now the level of trust is very low. especially in these modes. And naturally, these practices are providing for many doubts and they are not enjoying so much trust. But at the same time, we see that during the pandemics and COVID, the early voting is one of the alternative forms that are taken into consideration by several countries or that are opening this possibility for several groups, certain groups of citizens, or just conduct the elections longer than one day to avoid huge masses of people in one place. And all these questions should be taken into consideration additionally. And perhaps we don't have to directly, straightforwardly close the doors for all of the alternatives, but we need to understand that historical experience should be also taken into account. And the history is providing for many alternative things for the people who don't have the possibility to vote directly on place to make it any other way. Thank you. Comments? Veronica, Harald, perhaps somebody from the audience would like to comment? I beg your pardon, my microphone was off. But I would like to add one more topic before I will let the floor to Harold. This is about the alternative methods of voting, but also about the infrastructure related to the voting. And I think that we have to try to see the issue of the digital identification of voters and using of digital lists for identification, which will provide for easiness of solving of the issue about the location and about the voting connected to the place of presence at the day of voting. And I think here we could try to look at it, but technically it's not so easy if we are not in parallel working at solution of other issues. But I know some jumps in other countries who were who were transferred from the not the best list to the biometrics or even to some digital identification. Yes, Harold? The floor is yours. Thank you, Alex.
I think what you have in mind for election day, it seems to me it's the election day of the elections that will basically have to, which will be the first before you have a centralized voter register. I understand that correct? If not, I would say, I have basically the question whether you intend to allow registration of voters in polling stations on election day. It was not clear from the concept, and it's a way of dealing. It's certainly not something that is internationally recommended. It's a way of dealing with imperfect lists. But I would say for the long term, certainly you should not allow registration of voters on election day unless it's ordered by a court, по поручению или решению суда. Second question or comment is about how you handle those that lives away from their or want to vote away from their propiska, from the registration. And that's exactly what you asked me now to comment about. Can it be done with technical means? In Ukraine, we also considered whether we should reintroduce открепительные талоны, открепительные удостоверения. In the Ukrainian context, this is a no-go because there was massive falsification in the Orange Revolution election. So we actually invited voters to go to a registration point prior to election day and even prior to the registration of candidates to say and register an electoral address that is different from their propiska address. So that was how it was handled in Ukraine. But I would say in terms of voter identification at the polling station, it will take resources. So it will take training, there will be technical glitches. So while the intention is good, I think you should carefully consider whether the result will match the investment that you need to do in it. I would probably be very careful with going for such a solution, and try instead to have a centralized register and encourage people to go and check their preliminary registration in the published voter list prior to election day. Allow me also one comment on what you say about accessible polling station. This is very commendable. IFES as an organization is really working for this. There are other means to make the election process more accessible for voters with disabilities. For instance, if you plan to have posters with the candidates or with their programs, it can easily be assigned with a QR code with a link to the text that can be read aloud for persons with visual disabilities. So certainly think on consulting disabled persons organizations. They are aware about how you can further improve the accessibility of the election on election day. I think I will leave it with that for now.
Thank you, Harald. I'm pretty sure, and I want to speak that we are speaking not only about the accessibility within the day of voting, but we will look at all the elements of the elective process through this prism. But I think here just we will have a very evident point of contact for concrete technical solutions, but legal solutions are also not less important. For example, in terms of right of voice, of right of be elected. This is a very important moment for people who have different situations and different characteristics. And related to the day of voting, I think there could be one perhaps last moment. And this moment relates to the activities of media. Like colleagues, what would you like to say about this? As I think at the day of voting, it's not so easy to use this political advertising, because this political advertising may be too harsh. But in the 21st century, I think not in the very beginning of the 21st century, the day of silence has its sense like Saturday or Sunday off, and this limitation at the day of voting. Veronica, perhaps you would say something here. Yes, I think I will start. Thank you, Alexander. And here's the secret that is open. We were speaking with Alexander about this. The main problem in our time is that even this day of silence can be there, but very often many participants of voting process are misusing social networks. That means they are still there. And because social networks in the majority of the countries are not regulated, something can be, something cannot be there. It's not so easy to trace how and what will be done in the social networks and how to act and counteract it. And there is the question here, which is really open. Is there any sense in writing this as an outline, or because social networks and the majority of candidates will be there, there is no sense, no idea to think about this in our days and come to the practice of prohibition of a certain content which is put on Facebook and Google and YouTube, as it was unfortunately in the last elections in Russia. Frankly speaking, I think this is not the way, really. This is my opinion here. Yes, thank you. I think we will get back in a separate discussion to this in the last topic, referendum. We've started this expert seminar from this topic, and I think we are finalizing it also with the referendum. We were speaking at first about the so-called referendum, and we now will speak about the referendum of how it should be done in a democratic country. And here, I think we may put a pause on the peculiarities of regulation of referendum, but at the same time, we can speak about the issue of what is a referendum as an instrument of direct democracy. And does direct democracy have to have this constant form of formal will manifestation by the referendum? And here in the concept, we are speaking more about the technical side. But let us speak more about this fundamental and general role of referendum in the organization of life of the society. Vasily, would you like to start? Perhaps I will start. Yes, I think I will start. And I will start that we've been discussing, and many questions are out of the agenda right now related to the referendum. And I think, as I can understand this, we arrive at the decision that should be a basic regulation of the process of referendum in the code. It should be there. It's a logical thing if there is it. But referendums have their own peculiarities, and there are many of them, and they make referendums different. And the main moment here that we could speak about right now is the equality of possibilities. And I think that this is necessary. We all think that this is necessary. I may state it like this. And further on, use of the referendum, especially on the national level, and Belarus has a separate color here, which is not so appealing for people for this topic to be raised, to be supported furtherly in the mode which is posed by the state bodies and authorities. But I think for the future, we need to think about that, yes, indeed, as Alexander told, there is a referendum, how it can be an instrument of direct democracy. And I think here in the first line, we need to think about how this process to be put on the local level, where indeed there is a possibility, and there should be a possibility for many countries to push forward some questions that are a part of the local agenda for the overall voting in case there is a collection of signatures and there should be a sufficient quantity of people, of citizens who are introduced into this issue and legal consequences of these local referendums. This is not a question of the code, electoral code, but I think it should be discussed on the constitutional level, like in which cases for the solution of a low level, local level, there should be a referendum. What are the questions and issues where the citizens can initiate local initiatives? And these are the questions that as of now are not obligatory to be discussed and for us not to come to some prompt ideas, but we need to think about this further. All national referendum is the question of significantly of constitutional regulation, but still in the electoral code we could see the sense of foreseeing the main notions of the campaign and for provision of equal possibilities for those who are against and for certain initiatives. Financing of these campaigns is also a very interesting and a tricky question, really, especially when a certain social polarizing question is there, for which there could be different initiative groups for or against, which groups have to certainly have certain positions well balanced in financing, and they have also to get a possibility of reporting about the sources of financing, which should be also regulated because here there is also some space for misuse in different situations when somebody wants to affect referendum by means of financing of certain campaigns, then this should be also governed because there are some cases of this and the practice is showing in different countries that it can be done by huge input of means. And these still are the questions that should be taken into consideration and worked out. Thank you. Thank you, Vasily. And I think that the matter of referendum is a special issue because when we are speaking about the voting like candidate A, B, party, and so on. But let us speak about the referendum. There could be a situation when we have a project of the resolution backed by the governing party, uh, by the government, and there can be different opponents. There can be different reasons for opponents to be there. This party is against the other party, or 10th party, fourth party is against this. How can we discern between this equality of possibilities in agitation for and against legal entities, political subjects, or how, like the camp for and the camp against? This is not an obvious question, really, and I think here we will need to speak a bit more about this. But at the end of the day, we will need to have to study this logics which is put into the project of constitution of our new Belarus, especially about the local referendums as the means for solving of local issues, because there can be the other mechanisms, for example, when we are collecting some signatures, when the local authorities are obliged and have to publicly discuss certain issues. And this, I like this because this is not a super formal process of local referendum. But here again, certain politicians do love to declare the direct democracy as the main idea. And very often they do believe in this. I understand why, but very often this can be also more close to the interests of the people. Therefore, we will need to invest certain time in this. Does anybody have some comments on referendum? Harold, perhaps just a couple of words. Yes, just a couple of words. We've been now developing the Ukrainian law on national referendum, and there, speaking about the administration, all the participants at the process of referendum should be registered as opponents or as participants at the issue of the referendum question. And these are the political parties, also the parties that are a part of the parliament. And in Ukrainian context, there is the case, and how later on, as the set of electoral committees with the parity for the opponents and for the proponents of this. And I would get you a guess here. If you are coming for proportional principle of shaping of the commission, then the commission, electoral commission, I mean, can be also done as the commission for referendum. Therefore, you can spare some money here. And for example, you may conduct a referendum, for example, local referendum during the national elections. It can be conducted by the same commissions as a backup.
And I also wanted to add that the rights that the political parties use and benefit according to the agitation, the opinion, that can also be adjusted by the participants of the referendum procedure. And that is at the constitutional level. That's what we can or cannot add to the referendum, including the initiative groups for the corpus for referendum. Thank you, Harold. I guess that the last idea is from Veronica, and then we will do the conclusions. Yes, thank you so much, Alexandra, for the word. I will speak up with the idea which is not very popular here, but we have discussed it really great. I'm against the referendum that is done on national level. This is a referendum that solves local questions, and they can be existing, but the worldwide practice shows that referendum is a very complicated thing of direct democracy. That's what the Brexit showed. And actually, that shows the examples from our own region. And I think that that deserves some current discussions. That's what the Belarusian should discuss. And for me, that is kind of difficult thing to discuss. This is manipulating with the ideas, and we are not protected from it. So today, when we have this populism, and we should be very precise on how to work on that. Yeah, and I am very popular on that. I suppose that I love it when people discuss the unpopular points of view because they arrive the most important ideas. I see your point of view. Yeah, quite often we can see a lot of examples when during the referendum we took the solutions that were like politically good for a certain point of time, but if we are talking about this agitation, then that is something that should be discussed. And I think that we will finalize. I'm a bit hurrying up to finalize as far as in something less than an hour, I will be with the Belsat TV channel. They will be discussing that. That's what we should discuss. And of course, I am not too shy to finalize our discussion as far as I think that we're finalizing just the first discussion. And I think that we will follow our discussions and they will be not in that public format, of course, but we will discuss very specific things and we will discuss the topics that are interesting for us, on which we will be discussing that. I'm finalizing our today's seminar, and I would like to come back to the idea that our approach to the electoral code shows that we can't just sit down and write the text and keep discussing and consider the project to be our own, child. So when you have written a certain law, you will like to continue discussing it. So we suppose that that should be something democratic for new Belarus, and with the participation of political parties and civil society and international experts. And I suppose that our expert seminars will be a good basis for it. We suppose that as representatives of the society, I think that the whole idea that we are interested in participating about it, I think that we will not just be able to discuss it, but we will still be able to say that we will receive all the ideas with the prospects we have been seeing it and watching it. Whether that would be political parties that work on their specific ideas that are very important. By finalizing, I would like to say that we actually started discussing political powers, considering the new constitutional regulation, the referendum yesterday, and now we have been discussing the concept of the electoral code, and that was a great pleasure for me. And it's widely known that I'm kind of a scientist who loves to study, to learn, and we suppose that we can be discussing that for years to hold these discussions. And of course, we are extremely glad to see that there are discussions to which we find more answers than questions. And of course, that makes our life interesting. And if there are no questions that are left, we will not feel comfortable about it. And of course, we will, of course, discuss our discussion. We will have this discussion in 3 languages in YouTube and in Tsikhanouskaya Center platform. We will also make a short review. We will have time codes so that we will be able to navigate with our discussion. We'll make a short version of it so that it would be better for us and we could watch it even quicker. And I think that a short version will not be very short, as far as we will have to insert a lot of interesting details in it. And it shows that we had really good discussions today. And we would once again thank our colleagues for the expert support, for their help in organization. And of course, my special thanks go to our Belarusian experts. We are grateful to our international colleagues, but elections in Belarus are the Belarusian issue. And I'm glad that we had such a vivid discussion. And we had it in presence of other Belarusian experts. And for today, it's thank you and thanks to Harold once again. I think that we can finalize our seminar. Thank you so much for participation, and I'm sure we'll have the possibility to see each other in future. Thank you so much. Goodbye.